The Montana sun hung low and merciless over the Clearwater River that afternoon, turning its surface into a sheet of blinding copper. Most folks in Redemption County knew better than to cross at the bend during spring runoff, when snowmelt from the mountains turned the gentle stream into a churning beast. But Eleanor Hartwell wasn't most folks. She was a woman with nothing left to lose. The black mare had been her husband's favorite. Tom had died 6 months ago, crushed under a fallen oak while clearing their north pasture, and Eleanor had been selling off pieces of their life ever since. The mare was supposed to fetch enough money to keep the ranch through winter, maybe longer. But the buyer lived on the far side of the river, and Eleanor's grief had made her reckless. She'd urged the horse into the water despite the current's roar, despite the way the animal's eyes had rolled white with fear. They made it halfway before the river decided to claim them both. The current seized them like a giant's fist. Eleanor felt herself torn from the saddle, the reins burning through her palms as she tried desperately to hold on. Then she was under, the world a roaring brown chaos, her heavy riding skirts dragging her down like anchors. Water filled her nose, her mouth. She clawed toward what she thought was the surface, but the river spun her like a rag doll, and she couldn't tell up from down anymore. So this is how it ends, she thought with strange clarity. Tom, I'm coming. Then hands, strong, sure hands, gripped her shoulders and hauled her upward into the light. She broke the surface gasping, choking, her vision swimming. Someone was pulling her toward the shore with powerful strokes, fighting the current that still tried to claim her. She glimpsed a weathered face, intense blue eyes, a black cowboy hat somehow still miraculously on his head. Then her feet scraped bottom, and he was lifting her, carrying her up the muddy bank and laying her on solid ground. Eleanor coughed up what felt like half the river, her body shaking violently. The stranger knelt beside her, his hands steady on her back as she heaved and sputtered. "Easy now," he said, his voice like gravel wrapped in honey. "You're safe. Just breathe." When she could finally focus, she looked up at her rescuer. He was perhaps 40, with lines carved deep around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. His clothes were soaked through, water streaming from his hat, but his eyes held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "The mare," Eleanor managed to croak. "Made it to the other side," he said. "Saw her climb out downstream. She'll be all right." He paused. "You nearly weren't." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that truth settle over her. A stranger had just risked his life to save hers, a life she'd barely been holding on to anyway. The cowboys' camp was a quarter-mile upstream, tucked into a grove of cottonwoods where the river ran gentle and forgiving. He'd carried Eleanor there when her legs wouldn't hold her, and now she sat wrapped in a rough wool blanket by his small fire, still shivering despite the flames. Her wet clothes clung to her like a second skin, cold and miserable. "Name's Cole Brennan," he said, pouring coffee from a dented pot into a tin cup. "Been tracking stray cattle up from Texas. Lost the trail about a week back, figured I'd rest here before heading home. Eleanor Hartwell." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "I owe you my life." Cole shook his head. "Don't owe me anything. Just happened to be in the right place." He studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Though I got to ask, what possessed you to cross at the bend? Local woman like yourself should know better." The question, asked without judgment, broke something loose inside Eleanor. Maybe it was the near-death experience, or maybe it was simply that this stranger had pulled her from the depths and expected nothing in return. Whatever the reason, the truth came spilling out. She told him about Tom, about the empty house that echoed with memories, about the bank threatening foreclosure. She told him about selling their possessions piece by piece, watching their dream dissolve like morning frost. She told him things she hadn't even told her sister, how some morning she couldn't remember why she should get out of bed, how the silence was so loud it drowned out everything else. "I wasn't trying to die," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I wasn't trying very hard to live either." Cole was quiet for a long moment, feeding sticks into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of understanding. Lost my wife and baby daughter to fever, 7 years back. For a long time after, I was just going through the motions. Breathing but not living. He looked up at her. Took me years to learn the difference. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks, mixing with the river water still drying on her face. This stranger understood. This man she'd known for less than an hour understood the hollow place inside her better than anyone. You need to get out of those wet clothes, Cole said gently. You'll catch your death otherwise. I've got a spare shirt and blanket. I'll turn my back, give you privacy. Eleanor looked down at herself, at her ruined riding dress, at the widow's weeds she'd worn like armor for 6 months. Then she looked at this man who'd saved her life, who'd shared his own grief without hesitation, who was offering simple human kindness with no strings attached. Will you stay if I undress? The words left her mouth before she'd fully thought them through. The storm warnings came on the 8th day. Thomas had lived in Dakota Territory long enough to read the signs, the strange greenish cast to the sky, the oppressive stillness, the way the cattle clustered together nervously. He'd seen storms that could flatten buildings and drive rain sideways hard enough to strip paint from wood. We need to prepare, he told Eleanor at breakfast. There's a bad one coming. She looked out the window at the deceptively calm morning. How bad? Bad enough that we could lose livestock. Maybe buildings. He paused. In extreme cases, people. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but she set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Tell me what to do. They spent the morning in furious preparation. Thomas moved the cattle to a protected valley while Eleanor secured everything that could blow away, tools, loose boards, even the laundry that had been drying on the line. She worked with focused intensity, following his instructions exactly and anticipating needs before he voiced them. We need to bring the horses into the barn, Thomas called out as the wind began to pick up. They'll panic if the storm hits with them in the corral. Eleanor was already moving toward them, speaking in low, soothing tones that somehow calmed the nervous animals. Thomas watched in amazement as she led the most skittish mare, a horse that usually trusted no one, into the barn without incident. You're good with animals, he observed. Animals are honest, Eleanor replied. They don't pretend to be something they're not. The barb wasn't lost on Thomas, but there was no time to address it. The wind was strengthening by the minute, and the sky had turned an ominous dark gray shot through with sickly yellow. Get inside the house, Thomas ordered. I need to secure the barn doors. I'll help. No. The word came out harsher than he intended. Please, Eleanor. Just go inside. I can't worry about you and the ranch both. For a moment, he thought she'd argue, but she simply nodded and ran for the house. Thomas finished battening down the barn, his heart racing as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The storm hit like a physical blow. Thomas barely made it to the house before the full fury unleashed. Wind screamed around the building with a sound like 1,000 demons, and rain hammered down so hard he couldn't see the barn just 50 feet away. Lightning cracked across the sky in blinding sheets, and thunder followed so quickly the sound was nearly continuous. Inside, Eleanor had lit lamps and was methodically checking windows, stuffing rags around frames where wind whistled through. She'd moved furniture away from the walls and placed buckets strategically under spots where the unfinished roof might leak. Smart thinking, Thomas said, having to shout over the storm's roar. A tremendous crack split the air, and something massive crashed nearby, close enough to shake the house's foundation. Eleanor grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, her face pale but composed. Was that the barn? She asked. I don't know. Could be a tree. The wind reached a fever pitch, screaming like a living thing. Thomas saw the walls actually bow inward under the pressure, and for the first time, genuine fear gripped him. He'd built this house himself, but what if it wasn't strong enough? Eleanor appeared at his side, pressing a cup of water into his hands. The house will hold, she said with certainty. You built it well. I can see the quality of the workmanship. Her faith in him, unexpected and complete, steadied his nerves more than any whiskey could have. Stay away from the windows, he told her. If the glass breaks. The words were cut off by an explosion of sound as the kitchen window shattered inward, spraying glass across the floor. The next morning arrived with the crystalline clarity that only comes after storms, as if the world had been washed clean. Jack woke in his rocking chair, his neck stiff, to find the twins already awake, their clothes dry, standing by the window watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "We should go," May said when she noticed him stirring. "We have imposed too much." "Imposed?" Jack stood, working the kinks from his back. "You've been the best company I've had in 5 years. Besides, the bridge is probably washed out. You're not walking anywhere until I can drive you safely back to town." He made a breakfast of eggs and toast while they told him more about their studies. They were researching how American ranchers balanced conservation with cattle grazing, trying to find models that could work in China's changing agricultural landscape. "Your ranch," Lynn said haltingly in English, gaining confidence. "It is beautiful. You love the land. We can see." "I do," Jack admitted. "But I haven't been the best steward lately. Since Sarah died, I've just been going through the motions. The north pasture is overgrazed. The creek needs restoration. I keep meaning to plant native grasses, but—" He trailed off. May and Lynn exchanged another of their telepathic looks. Then May spoke carefully, "Mr. Jack, we have proposal. We need research site for our thesis. We need to understand American ranch conservation from living on ranch, not from books. You need help with land restoration. We need place to conduct study. Maybe we could help each other." Jack felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Possibility. "You want to stay here? Work on the ranch?" "If you allow," Lynn said, her English gaining strength from excitement. "We can document everything. We can help restore land. We can learn. And you." She paused, searching for words, "You will not be alone." Jack walked to the window, looking out at the land that had been his prison and sanctuary. He thought about what Lynn had said last night, hiding is like holding your breath. He'd been holding his breath for 5 years. "I can't pay you much," he said slowly. "There's a guest cabin that needs work, but it has good bones. You'd have your privacy. We'd need to set ground rules, make sure everything's proper and above board. We would work for room and food," May said quickly. "Our scholarships cover tuition. This would be perfect for research." "But Mr. Jack." She hesitated. "Why do you say yes? We are strangers." Jack turned from the window, and for the first time in years, he felt a genuine smile cross his face. "Yesterday, you asked if I would stay while you undressed. You needed to know if you could trust me. Today, I'm choosing to trust you. Maybe that's what healing looks like, choosing to risk connection even when you're scared." The twins smiled, identical expressions of joy lighting their faces like twin suns. Catherine stood beneath the vast Montana sky, feeling infinitely small and yet somehow significant. The stars seemed close enough to touch, and the silence was profound, broken only by the gentle sound of the creek and the distant call of a night bird. "In your letters," Jake continued, his voice barely above a murmur, "you wrote about wanting a fresh start, about feeling like your life in Boston was someone else's story. I understood that because I felt the same way. After my parents died, I threw myself into building this ranch, proving I could make something of myself. But I realized I was building it for nobody, just to fill the emptiness. When you agreed to come here, you gave me something to build toward, not just away from." Catherine turned to look at him, seeing vulnerability in his face that hadn't been there before. "I was terrified the entire journey," she admitted. "Every mile that passed, I questioned my decision. What kind of woman marries a stranger? What kind of desperation drives someone to cross a continent for a man she's only known through letters? And now?" Jake asked. Now I think perhaps it takes courage, not desperation. And perhaps knowing someone through their written words, when they have time to think and be honest, reveals more truth than months of supervised parlor visits ever could. Jake smiled, and Catherine noticed how it transformed his face, making him look younger and less burdened. The Reverend is in town, he said. Whenever you're ready, we can make this official. But there's no rush. You can take time to be certain, to settle in and decide if this life is truly what you want. I'd like that, Catherine agreed. Not because I'm uncertain, but because I want to make this choice deliberately, with full knowledge of what it means. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Catherine thought about the life she had left behind, the small boarding house room, the restricted existence of a single woman in the city, the limited prospects and endless propriety. Here, under this enormous sky, she felt possibilities opening up that she had never imagined. Thank you for waiting for me, she finally said. For not giving up when I was late. For being patient and kind. For being exactly who you claimed to be in your letters. Jake turned to her, and in the starlight, she could see the emotion in his eyes. I told you in my first letter that I believed in keeping promises. When I wrote to you, when you agreed to come here, I made a promise to myself that I would be worthy of your trust. That's a promise I intend to keep every single day, for the rest of our lives. As they walked back to the house, Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't the romantic story she might have read in novels, with instant passion and dramatic declarations. This was something better, honest, real, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared hopes. The hard work would come, she knew. There would be challenges and difficulties she couldn't yet imagine. But there would also be this, starlit nights, honest conversations, and the steady presence of a man who kept his promises. When they reached the porch, Jake paused. Welcome home, Catherine, he said simply. And for the first time in her life, Catherine Miller truly felt like she was home.